When he released a mountain of grand jury evidence, the county prosecutor stressed that some witnesses couldn't keep their stories straight.
Many witnesses to the shooting of Michael Brown made statements inconsistent with other statements they made.
So we wondered, what about key witness Dorian Johnson?
He put his hands in the air.
The friend who was closest to the action when Michael Brown was shot. Records show grand jurors watched 6 interviews he did with local stations.
The squad car vehicle approaches us.
National networks.
His left arm out the window and grabbed my friend around the throat.
And with KSDK's own Farah Fazal.
I'm standing not feet away, not even inches away, an inch away from everything that's happening.
Then, records show the grand jury listened to an FBI interview of Johnson, over 2 hours long, making notes on transcripts provided by prosecutors. So, did Dorian Johnson change his story when he met with the FBI? When we started to ask that question, we made an interesting discovery. Even though McCullough released thousands of pages of evidence, Johnson's interview with the FBI is nowhere to be found. That surprised St. Louis University law professor Marcia McCormick.
And to the extent that Dorian Johnson was one of the primary witnesses suggesting that Officer Wilson might not have been justified in shooting Mr. Brown, then knowing what Mr. Johnson said earlier might help us know whether he was one of the people who gave inconsistent statements or consistent statements.
In the files McCullough's office did provide, the witnesses are numbered, all the way up to witness number 64. But there is not testimony from 64 different witnesses. In fact, only the testimony from 24 witnesses was released, even though McCullough himself stressed he was trying to be open about the grand jury process.
And the testimony of the witnesses called to the grand jury will be released at the conclusion of this statement.
But we now know that it's not all available.
We don't have the full picture.
When we asked about the missing records, McCullough's executive assistant, Ed McGee, told me everything they still had when the case was closed was released. But he added the county prosecutor's office had, quote, turned over and relinquished control of the FBI's interviews. He said the FBI specifically asked the county not to release records that are part of the ongoing federal civil rights probe. Those are not our records, McGee said. Turns out some records, clearly marked as FBI interviews, were released. Some, but not all. The U.S. Justice Department in Washington declined to comment. Could we possibly conclude that they said, well, this stuff actually isn't really important to us, but this other stuff is, so we don't want you to release that?
It's possible. And the question that the federal government is investigating, that the Department of Justice is looking at, is a different legal question. It's not a question about whether or not Officer Wilson was justified under Missouri law in the actions that he took, but whether when he acted he knew or recklessly disregarded the constitutional rights of Mr. Brown.
Now, the missing records are not public during the federal probe, but we have requested that they be released under the Freedom of Information Act when the Justice Department completes its investigation. And more information could still surface if Michael Brown's family decides to file a civil suit.